since the pandemic and the stay-at-home order began, Wisconsin had had a moratorium on evictions for the inability to pay rent. So uh, landlords were unable to evict tenants if they were unable to pay rent. In addition, they weren't able to do inspections of properties and come in and do showings at properties. And with that order having expired, the stay-at-home order, landlords can now go in with proper notice and do inspections. The moratorium on evictions has also expired as of May 26th at 8 a.m. And what that means is that landlords have the ability now, if a tenant has not paid rent, to proceed with the termination of tenancy notice and then proceed trying to get a writ of eviction through the courts. They can take their tenant to court and try and proceed with an eviction. And so those have both ended and expired, and we're back to, in those frame of reference, a normal state of affairs, if you will. But what's different now in what could assist tenants who may still have economic crisis, and same with landlords, is that there is the Wisconsin Rental Assistance Program, or RAP. And this is a program that could provide assistance to eligible renters who've had this significant loss of income due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the features, if you qualify, is that the payment will go directly to the landlord. So if landlords are in a position where they are not receiving rent from a tenant, they may want to work with or talk with their tenant to see if they've applied for this, because it could really help both parties out in this case, because the tenant could potentially stay in the property and not be evicted, and the landlord would receive their rental payment as well, which of course those landlords need that. There are some basic application guidelines, and they include eligible applicants must be an adult, so Wisconsin resident with a household income at or below 80% of the county median income in the month prior to the application date. So that's kind of confusing. But then there's eligible costs include both direct financial assistance for rent owned and security deposits. And then rental assistance up to $3,000 per individual could be available. So again, that's that rent and security deposit combined. So the RAP program, or Wisconsin Rental Assistance Program, is really something that could provide great value and is new. Again, it's something that's just started in the last few weeks, and the applications just being available in the last week or so. We want to make sure the word is out for both tenants and landlords, and it's a program being administered by the Department of Administration. So really, everyone should be looking into this if they are still in a position where they're unable to make their rent payments. If tenants aren't eligible for this and landlords are questioning, what their next step is and do they want to evict or how can they help, we've said from the beginning, communicate with one another. Be sure that you are talking. Maybe you can work out some other kind of payment arrangement, but then make sure you document that as well, because that's an advantage to both the tenant and the landlord to have that documented and written down so both understand what the expectations and new agreement is. Things that usually are important to make sure both parties understand is, what is the new arrangement or agreement? How much is going to be paid? What interval will that payment be made at? What's its new due date? What's if you're allowing kind of an extension of time, what's the new full payment payback period? Who will be making these payments, or what's the responsibility there? So the other important change that was made and is still in place factors into these new agreements. The Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection went through an emergency rulemaking process. And as of April 26th, I believe, maybe it was the 25th, losing that date there, Um, as of, so the department went through a period of emergency rulemaking, and as of April 25th, um, landlords are unable to charge late rent fees or late penalties to a tenant if they're unable to pay the rent or if they're only able to pay a portion of the rent, and that goes until August 8th. So that's an important factor in all this, in the fact that um, if you're making a new arrangement, or even if you have your current existing rental agreement and it had a provision for late fees, landlords can't charge those right now. They can't accumulate. If a tenant was late with their rent in April, and they had a late fee issue as part of their rental agreement, they can go right up to the 25th with whatever that agreement was and apply it. But as soon as April 25th came, the emergency rule went into place and landlords wouldn't be able to do that. Now, again, this is not a waiver. This is not any kind of pass for tenants to pay rent. They're still responsible for rent. Again, the moratorium on eviction has expired, so if they don't pay their rent, they run the risk of a landlord taking an action to evict. There is the RAPS program as a point of reference, but if a tenant isn't eligible. So these are all factors and considerations in this relationship that landlords and tenants have, and should make sure that they are in communication, trying to work with one another and documenting whatever new agreements they come to, but make sure they're working within the provisions of the laws that exist today. So the agency has on its website frequently asked questions related to landlord-tenant issues, what exists today, what protections, what programs, what resources are out there for landlords and tenants, and links to those. So go to our website at datcp.wi.gov. You can access those in our COVID section of frequently asked questions. There'll be a landlord-tenant component. We also always have available our landlord-tenant rights and responsibilities and our landlord-tenant guide that would be valuable for consumers to reference. But you can also reach us and ask questions on our consumer hotline at 1-800-422-7128.